They never found his body, but they found blood, an astonishing amount of it. For 47 years, I was convinced my James had been murdered. That is, until the mysterious package showed up on my doorstep, postmarked from Mexico. That package shattered everything I thought I knew about love, loss, and the bizarre twists of fate that shape our lives. Hello, everyone. I'm Geraldine Jerry Whitaker, 78 years young and still going strong. In Okichi, most folks still call me Miss Jerry, even though I haven't been a miss in decades. Back in 1947, I was Geraldine May Harrington, born in the tiny town of Okichi, Vermont. You know the type. A place where everyone knows your name, your business, and probably what you had for breakfast. Secrets there were rarer than snow in July, or so we thought back then. My dad owned Harrington's Pharmacy on Main Street, the only drugstore for 20 miles. It wasn't just a place to fill prescriptions, it was the heart of the town. Shiny wooden counters, a soda fountain, and those red vinyl stools we kids loved spinning on until we were dizzy. People wandered in just to chat, celebrate good news, or find comfort when times were tough. My mom, God rest her soul, was what folks called delicate. She suffered terrible migraines that kept her bedridden for days, with even the faintest light blocked out by heavy curtains. So from the time I could reach the cash register, I helped Dad at the store. By 16, I could mix any soda combination you could dream up, recommend remedies for everything from diaper rash to gout, and count pills faster than most trained pharmacists. I know what you're thinking. Just another small-town story, right? But let me tell you, dear ones, some of the deepest secrets hide in the tiniest places. If you're from a small town too, drop a comment and tell me where. It would mean the world to know who's listening. Where was I? Oh, right, Okichi in 1965. That spring, I turned 18, graduated high school, and had dreams bigger than our little town could hold. I'd been accepted to the University of Vermont, set to start that fall, the first Harrington girl to go to college. Dad was so proud, he told everyone who walked through the pharmacy door, even Mrs. Peterson, who just came for bunion pads. Mom, of course, worried herself sick. What if you meet some city boy and never come back? She'd fuss, brushing my hair like I was still a little girl. The plan was to work at the pharmacy all summer, saving every penny for textbooks and college supplies. I kept a little notebook tracking my earnings, grinning as the numbers grew each week. I handed out milkshakes and cherry cokes, listening to people's stories, complaints, and gossip. Old Mr. Finley came every Wednesday for his heart medication, regaling me with World War II tales. The Henderson twins split a root beer every Friday after piano lessons, pooling their allowance. Mrs. Collins, who'd been widowed years before, stopped by almost daily, ostensibly for small items, but really just to talk to someone. Life in Okichi was predictable, safe, but I craved something new, something exciting. As the old saying goes, be careful what you wish for. I had my share of suitors, guys asking me to the movies, to park at Miller's Pond, but none made my heart race. Billy Johnson had liked me since 3rd grade, and I did let him take me to the prom, but dancing with him was like dancing with my brother. Kenny Matthews, the football star, was handsome enough, but he only talked about his passing stats and his dream of making it to the big leagues. Then there was Sam Porter, whose family owned an apple orchard outside town. He was kind and thoughtful, but when he kissed me after the spring music festival, I felt nothing, not a spark, not a flutter. Mom said I was too picky. Geraldine May, love isn't all fireworks and butterflies, she'd lecture. You need a steady man who can provide. But I'd read too many novels under the covers with a flashlight, dreamed too many dreams to settle for steady. Then came that sweltering July day, July 17th, 1965, to be exact. Some dates stick with you forever. By 10 a.m., the thermometer outside the pharmacy window hit 91 degrees Fahrenheit, about 32.8 Celsius, and the electric fan behind the counter blew nothing but hot air. My cotton dress stuck to my back, my hair pulled up in a messy bun, and for the 100th time that summer, I wished Dad would spring for a new air conditioner. That's when James Calloway walked into Dad's pharmacy, and the little bell above the door jingled. He wasn't from Okichi, you could tell right away. Tall and straight-backed, confident but not arrogant, with a soft southern accent that made my knees weak. He wore khaki pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms tanned and muscular from outdoor work. But what really caught my eye was his face. Not traditionally handsome, but striking, with eyes the color of a summer sky, sharp and intelligent, crinkled at the corners like he laughed a lot, even though he was still young. A tiny scar above his right eyebrow, which I later learned came from falling out of an apple tree when he was 10. When he smiled at me, Lord, time stood still, as if the world paused between two heartbeats. Ma'am, I reckon I underestimated the Vermont sun. His voice was like warm honey with a hint of gravel. I'm sunburned something fierce, look like a lobster, and feel worse. I couldn't help but laugh, suddenly self-conscious about my messy hair and sweaty collar. You must be passing through, I said, reaching for the calamine lotion behind the counter. Locals know better than to stay out in this heat without a hat. Guilty as charged, he admitted, leaning slightly on the counter. Up close, I saw his sunburn was bad, his nose and cheeks bright red, peeling at the bridge. I'm from Virginia, working construction with my uncle. We're building the new library on Maple Street. Does this stuff actually work? He nodded at the pink bottle in my hand. It'll take the edge off, I said, suddenly turning serious to hide my fluster. But you need to stay out of the sun for a day or two, drink plenty of water, and maybe take some aspirin for the inflammation. I set the bottle on the counter between us. You sure know your stuff, he said, those summer sky eyes locking onto mine. Well, I've been helping out here since I could walk, I replied. After that, James found a reason to come to the pharmacy every day. Sometimes for soda, sometimes for aspirin or Band-Aids. Construction work is hard on the hands, he'd say, showing me his blisters like they were badges of honor. Other times, he'd just buy an ice-cold Coca-Cola, claiming our fountain served the coldest in town. And me? I'd watch the clock, counting down the minutes until he might walk through that door. Dad noticed, of course. Richard Harrington had eyes like a hawk, especially when it came to his only daughter. That Virginia boy sure goes through a lot of pharmacy supplies, he commented one night as we closed up. I busied myself wiping down the counter, hoping he didn't see me blushing. He's in construction. Dad, it's dangerous work. Dad just grunted thoughtfully, counting the day's earnings. Funny how his injuries always show up right before you're supposed to close. I had no comeback. For 3 weeks straight, James arrived promptly at 4:50 p.m., just as I was getting ready to shut down the soda fountain. It was my best friend since kindergarten, Maddie Cooper, who finally pushed me to do something. Maddie worked at the town library and stopped by the pharmacy on her lunch break. Good grief, Jerry, she said, stirring her iced tea so hard she nearly poked a hole in the glass. That poor boy is going bankrupt buying unnecessary soda and Band-Aids. Either tell him you're not interested or go on a real date with him. What if he's just being friendly? I worried, twisting a napkin into a tight ball. What if I'm reading too much into it? Maddie rolled her eyes so hard I thought she'd strain her neck. What man needs 3 bottles of aspirin in a month? Unless he's trying to win over the pharmacist's daughter. She was right, of course she was. So the next time James came in, this time for mints, Uncle says my coffee breath is terrible. I took a deep breath and went for it. You know, I said casually as I rang him up, the Sound of Music is playing at the Royal Theatre this Friday night. I hear it's really good. The smile that spread across his face could have lit up all of Okichi during a blackout. Miss Harrington, he said, placing a hand over his heart, are you asking me out on a date? Maybe, Mr. Calloway, I replied, surprised by my own boldness. Unless you'd rather spend another evening buying things you don't need. He laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled every corner of the store. I'd be honored. Though I must confess, I do actually need that aspirin. You Vermont mosquitoes have a taste for Southern blood. That Friday, everything changed. James picked me up in his uncle's truck, which he'd cleaned until it shone. He wore a button-down collar shirt and slacks, his dark hair combed neatly with pomade, and held a small bouquet of wildflowers. For the prettiest girl in Vermont, he said, handing them to me at the door. The movie was wonderful, but I barely noticed Julie Andrews dancing through the Austrian countryside. My mind was filled with James, his smell of soap and sunshine in the dark theater, the way he tentatively took my hand halfway through, like he was afraid I might pull away. After the movie, we went to Donovan's Diner for milkshakes, sitting in a booth by the window and talking until Mr. Donovan started stacking chairs on the tables, a not-so-subtle hint it was time to close. We talked about everything. The embarrassment of being dressed as a doll by his 3 older sisters as a kid, my dream of becoming a pharmacist like Dad, the books we loved, the places we wanted to visit. By August, we spent every evening together. James picked me up after work, and we'd drive his uncle's truck to Firefly Ridge to watch the sunset. It became our special place, a grassy overlook with panoramic views of the entire town. Sometimes he'd bring his guitar, playing old folk songs and telling me about his dream of becoming an architect. I want to design houses, he said one night as we lay on a blanket, watching the stars come out. Not just houses, homes. Places where people can put down roots, make memories, pass things down through generations. He turned to look at me, his eyes serious in the fading light. I want to build something beautiful and lasting. The way he looked at me made me think I might be one of those lasting things he wanted to hold on to. Mom, naturally worried. Summer romances burn bright and fade fast, Mary, she warned me one night before bed, the feel of James's goodnight kiss still on my lips. That boy will be gone in September, and all you'll have are memories and maybe a broken heart. It's not like that, Mom, I insisted, brushing my hair 100 strokes like she'd taught me. James is different. They all seem different at first, she sighed, tucking me in. But in the end, they're all the same. But James really was different from all the other summer flings. August turned to September, the leaves began to turn, and I waited for the inevitable goodbye. The library was nearly finished. His uncle's crew was moving on to New Hampshire for their next job. And James had to return to Virginia to finish his last year of college. I braced myself for the heartbreak Mom had predicted, determined to be brave when the time came. On the last Friday of August, James picked me up as usual, but something felt off. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his pockets, taking turns too fast in his uncle's old truck. Are you okay? I asked as we drove along the winding road to Firefly Ridge. You seem restless. Just really want to see the sunset, he said, his voice an octave higher than normal. They say it's going to be spectacular tonight. It was a perfect late summer evening in Vermont, cool, but not cold, the air filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers, the sky painted in hues of gold and red like someone had spilled a paint box. James spread out our usual blanket under the old oak tree, but instead of sitting, he stood there, shifting from foot to foot. James Calloway, what on earth is going on? I finally laughed at his odd behavior. You look like you're about to jump out of your skin. He took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair, and then completely out of the blue, he dropped to one knee on Firefly Ridge as the setting sun turned the sky pink and gold. Geraldine May Harrington. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. I came to Vermont to build a library, but I found something far more precious than any building. I found you, and I don't want to leave you. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, simple but beautiful, a tiny diamond set in gold. It was my grandmother's, he said, never taking his eyes off me. She gave it to me before she passed away last year, told me to save it for a girl who makes me feel like I can fly. With you, Jerry, I feel that way, like I could jump off this ridge and never land. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure he could hear it. This wasn't supposed to happen. Summer romances weren't supposed to end with marriage proposals, and summer boys weren't supposed to look at you like you were their entire world. I know it's fast, he said when I didn't answer right away. I know we're young, and we have a lot to figure out, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So, will you marry me, Mary? I didn't hesitate. Yes. I threw my arms around his neck, nearly knocking him over, crying and laughing at the same time. He slipped the ring on my finger. It was a little loose, but I didn't care. Nothing had ever felt so right. We stayed on the ridge until the stars were bright, talking about our future plans, dreaming our dreams, speaking excitedly and stealing kisses. The world felt full of endless possibilities, just like the twinkling lights of Okeechee below us. Of course, reality had to set in. James still had to return to Virginia to finish his architecture degree, and I had to start at the University of Vermont. We'd have to wait. Just 1 year, he said as we drove back to town reluctantly, my head on his shoulder, Grandma's ring glinting in the moonlight. I'll graduate next June, we'll get married right away, and start our lives together. When we pulled up to my house, all the lights were on, unusual for that hour. Mom and Dad were sitting in the living room, their faces tense with worry, but they looked confused when they saw us grinning from ear to ear. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, James said, squeezing my hand tightly, I've asked your daughter to marry me, and she's agreed. It would be the greatest honor of my life. After a long silence, Dad stood up, his expression unreadable. Young man, when were you planning on asking my permission? James's face fell. Sir, But then Dad's serious expression cracked into a smile, and he clapped James on the shoulder. Just teasing, son. Though a heads up would have been nice. Richard, Mom scolded, but she was smiling too, standing up to hug me. Oh, my baby girl, engaged. Dad, we don't want a big wedding, I hurried to say. Just a small one next June, after James graduates. Mom was already planning. June is perfect for a wedding. Of course we'll have it at the church, with Pastor Taylor officiating. You'll need a wedding dress. Mine can be altered, though the style is a bit outdated. Helen, Dad interrupted gently, let the kids breathe before we start planning everything. James didn't leave until nearly midnight. We talked through all the practical details with Mom and Dad. He'd head back to Virginia in 3 days to start his final year of college. I'd leave for the University of Vermont the following week. We'd write every week and call when we could afford it. He'd try to come for Thanksgiving, and I might visit his family for Christmas. As soon as he graduated in June, we'd get married. James took half my heart back to Virginia with him. I kept busy preparing for college, showing off my ring to Maddie and the other girls, collecting recipes and homemaking tips from Mom and the other ladies at church. We wrote every week, sketching our future in blue ink on white paper. His letters smelled faintly of blueprint paper and the sandalwood cologne he wore, each one a treasure I read over and over until the creases wore thin. "Just one more year," he'd write. "One more year, and it will be forever." I threw myself into my studies at the University of Vermont, trying to fill the James-shaped hole in my heart. I was studying pharmacy, following in Dad's footsteps, though James always teased that I'd be the most successful Harrington yet. "You'll probably invent some miracle drug," he wrote, while I'm still trying to draw a straight line without a ruler. We saw each other at Thanksgiving. His parents insisted on driving him up to Vermont to meet their future daughter-in-law's family. His mom, Martha, was a tiny woman with the same blue eyes as James, her southern hospitality filling our house with laughter. His dad, George, was quieter, but I watched him and Dad stay up late drinking bourbon, finding common ground despite their different backgrounds. For Christmas, I took the train to Richmond, staying in their beautiful old colonial-style house, complete with a wraparound porch and stained glass windows in the foyer. I met James's 3 older sisters, Elizabeth, Anna, and Rebecca, who welcomed me like family. They showed me baby pictures of James as a chubby toddler and lanky teenager, telling stories of how he'd built elaborate forts and designed treehouses in their backyard, with Dad's help. He was always drawing, Elizabeth told me as we prepared Christmas dinner. Buildings, bridges, cities he imagined in his head. When people asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, he'd always say, "I want to build beautiful things," even when he was just 5 years old. After that holiday, the separation became even harder. We both knew exactly what we were missing. The letters grew more frequent, sometimes 2 or 3 a week. We counted down the days on our calendars, 100 days, 75 days, 50 days, united in our anticipation across more than 500 miles. By the spring of 1966, everything was falling into place. James wrote that he'd gotten top marks on his final design project, the highest in his class, and had lined up a job at an architecture firm in Burlington, just an hour's drive from Okeechee, thanks to a recommendation from his professor. The starting salary wasn't great, but it would be enough for us to live comfortably, especially once I graduated. We found a small rental house with a backyard, perfect for starting our lives together. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, owned a hardware store in Burlington and had known Dad for years. He gave us a discount on the rent and said we could paint the rooms any color we wanted. James had already drawn up plans for built-in bookshelves, mapped out the furniture arrangement for each room, and even planned a small vegetable garden in the backyard. My wedding dress was finished in early June, ivory satin trimmed with lace, a family heirloom that my grandmother had brought with her when she immigrated to America from Ireland as a young woman. All spring, Mom and I worked on the dress together, sewing pearls onto the skirt and adjusting the hem late at night over cups of tea, listening to soft music on the radio. When I tried on the finished dress for the first time, Mom cried, and Dad, peeking through the doorway, had tears in his eyes too. The invitations were sent, ivory cards with elegant script, announcing that Geraldine May Harrington and James Edward Calloway would be married on June 25, 1966, at Okeechee First Presbyterian Church. The church was booked, Pastor Taylor had met with us several times to go over the ceremony details, and Dad had ordered a special cake from a fancy bakery 2 towns over. A 3-tiered buttercream cake decorated with fresh flowers that matched my bouquet of daisies and baby's breath. Everything was ready. After 10 months of separation, hundreds of letters, and thousands of miles, we were just days away from starting our new life together. The night before James was supposed to drive to Okeechee, we had our last phone call before the wedding. Long-distance calls were expensive, so we only made one a month, saving our money for our future. But this call was special. It would be our last conversation apart, and then we'd never be separated again. "This time tomorrow, I'll be there." His voice crackled with static, but overflowed with emotion. "In 2 weeks, you'll be Mrs. Calloway." "I can't believe it's finally happening," I said, twisting the phone cord around my finger, Grandma's ring catching the light from my bedside lamp. 10 months feels like 10 years, longest 10 months of my life. "But every minute was worth it," he said. "I'm all packed, clothes, drafting tools, all your letters tied up with that blue ribbon you gave me for Christmas." "Drive carefully." I suddenly felt anxious. It's a long way from Richmond to Okeechee, especially in his uncle's old truck. "I've waited this long, I don't mind waiting one more day," he said. "I'll be careful, I promise. I'll leave at dawn, should be there by dinner." I can't wait to hold you, Mary, to see your smile in person, not just in my dreams. Just one more day, I whispered. I love you to the moon and back, Mary, he said, the same goodbye we used in every letter and phone call. I love you to the stars and beyond, James, I replied, as I always did. Those were the last words we ever spoke. His truck was found near the Virginia-West Virginia border, parked on a remote gravel road with the engine still warm. In the trunk, his clothes were nearly all packed. On the front seat was his wallet, containing $43, his driver's license, and my photograph tucked behind it. But James was gone. There was blood on the gravel beside the truck, not much, they said, but enough to worry. Enough to bring in search dogs to comb the nearby woods, enough to drag the nearby creek, enough to make everyone fear the worst. The police had all kinds of theories. He might have been robbed by a hitchhiker, attacked while stopping to help someone. But there were no witnesses, and besides that small patch of blood, no clues. It was like a vanishing act, leaving a hole in my heart as big as Vermont itself. The wedding date came and went, the white dress still hanging in my closet in its garment bag, a ghost of a dream never realized. You know what the worst part was? Not the waiting, it was the sympathy. In the grocery store, at church, even at Dad's pharmacy, I could see it in people's eyes. Poor Jerry Harrington, left at the altar by her fiancé. They whispered, must be something wrong with her, probably got cold feet. Maybe he found someone else. No one wanted to say what we were all thinking. Something terrible had happened to James. A man who loved me as much as he did wouldn't just disappear without a trace. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sheriff Miller organized search parties, combing the woods for miles around where James's truck was found. Virginia State Police dragged all the ponds and creeks within 10 miles, questioning gas station attendants, diner waitresses, motel clerks, anyone who might have seen James on his drive north. But nothing turned up. No one remembered seeing him after he left his parents' house in Richmond. 3 weeks later, the FBI got involved. Agent Donovan had a serious face and tired eyes, clearly no stranger to missing persons cases. He set up a temporary office at Town Hall and interviewed everyone who knew James. Miss Harrington, he said to me after a month of investigating, sometimes people disappear because they want to disappear. Have you considered that possibility? I slapped him across the face right then and there, and Dad had to pull me away. I'm not proud of it now, but back then, the thought that James had abandoned me on purpose felt like someone had stabbed me through the heart. Summer turned to fall, fall to winter. The searches stopped. The FBI closed their temporary office, and James's parents returned to Virginia, their faces etched with grief. Before they left, his mom hugged me tightly. Jerry, he loved you more than anything, she whispered. Something terrible happened to our son, I can feel it in my bones. By Christmas, most people stopped mentioning James around me. They thought it was kindness, but their silence only made his absence more noticeable. I clung to the small mementos, the letters tied with blue ribbon, the flannel shirt he'd left at my house after a bonfire, the engagement announcement from the Okichi Weekly that ran before he disappeared. Dad worried about me. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, had nightmares where James was walking through fog, calling my name, but I could never reach him. Jerry, you need to get away from here, he said one night. This town is full of ghosts for you. My Aunt Clara lived in Boston, working as a nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she had a spare room in her apartment. Just go for a few months, Dad begged. Until spring, until you can catch your breath. I agreed, not because I wanted to leave, but because I couldn't bear everyone's constant worry. In January 1967, I packed a suitcase, tucked James's letters into my coat pocket, and boarded a Greyhound bus. As the bus pulled out of Okichi, it was snowing heavily, covering everything in a blanket of pure, silent white. Boston was a completely different world, loud, crowded, and oblivious to my pain. No one looked at me with sympathy. No one knew I was the girl whose fiancé had vanished. I was just another face in the crowd, and that anonymity brought a strange kind of comfort. Aunt Clara worked the night shift, so most evenings I had the small apartment to myself. After weeks of staring at the walls, I decided to get a job. There was a small bookstore near Harvard Square with a help wanted sign in the window. The owner, Mrs. Abernathy, was a widowed woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She didn't ask too many questions, just handed me a broom and showed me how she liked the books arranged. Working at the bookstore saved me in ways I never could have imagined. I threw myself into the routine of shelving books, recommending novels to customers, and ordering new stock. Whenever my thoughts turned dark, I'd pick up a book and lose myself in someone else's story. Day by day, hour by hour, I began to build a life without James. That summer, Aunt Clara suggested I take night classes. Jerry, you're smart, she said. Why not take some courses? Nursing school is always looking for bright young women. I enrolled in pre-nursing classes at Boston Community College, and when I got an A on my first anatomy exam, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever: pride, ambition, hope. In 1969, I became a licensed nurse, specializing in emergency care. The urgency of the ER, the need to focus completely on the task at hand, quieted the endless questions swirling in my mind. When my hands were busy saving lives, my heart could finally rest from its endless searching. That spring, I met Thomas Whitaker in the ER. He was a resident physician, tall, thoughtful, with gentle hands and a soft voice. I was stabilizing a young patient who'd been in a motorcycle accident when he came in to assess the injuries. After we wheeled the patient into surgery, Dr. Whitaker asked if I wanted to get a cup of coffee in the hospital cafeteria. "Just coffee," I said firmly, not ready to start a new relationship. "Just coffee," he agreed with a smile. Coffee turned into lunch the next week. Lunch turned into dinner at a little Italian restaurant near the harbor. Thomas never pushed, never asked questions. Finally, one evening on a bench overlooking the water, I told him about James. He just listened, no theories, no empty words of comfort, just held my hand and sat quietly with me as the waves crashed against the shore. "Jerry, sometimes there are no answers," he said finally. "Sometimes we have to learn to live with the questions." It took another year before I agreed to date Thomas officially, nearly 2 years before I kissed him without feeling like I was betraying James. When he proposed in the fall of 1971, I panicked, running out of the restaurant and trembling on the sidewalk, overwhelmed by memories of another proposal, another ring, another life. Thomas found me, gave me space, never making me feel like I was wrong for still grieving a man who'd been missing for 5 years. "Jerry, I'm not trying to replace him," he said gently. "I just want a chance to build something new, something different, with you." 3 weeks later, I said yes. We had a small wedding in Boston, no white dress, no church, just a civil ceremony at City Hall with Aunt Clara and a few friends from the hospital in attendance. I put James's engagement ring in a small box in my dresser drawer. Thomas knew, and he understood, some wounds never fully heal. You just learn to build your life around them. In 1972, we moved to Hartford, Connecticut, where Thomas had accepted a job as a pediatrician. I worked part-time as a nurse at a clinic for low-income families, finding purpose in helping children who had nothing. We bought a small house with a garden, where I planted roses and adopted a stray cat named Midnight. We lived a quiet life together, filled with small joys and ordinary days. But every year, on what would have been my wedding anniversary with James, I took the day off, opened the box of his letters, and read them one by one, allowing myself to remember, to grieve, to wonder. Thomas never asked what I did that day. He just made sure there were fresh flowers on the table when I came downstairs, a silent acknowledgement that a ghost still lived in our marriage. Life moves forward, even when part of you is stuck in the past. Thomas and I tried to have children, but it wasn't meant to be. After 3 miscarriages, the doctor advised us to stop trying. I wish I could say I accepted it gracefully, but the truth is, I felt angry at this second great loss. Hadn't I given up enough? Hadn't fate taken enough from me? In 1975, Thomas suggested adoption. "There are so many children who need homes after the Vietnam War," he said. We adopted our daughter Lily when she was just 3 months old, a beautiful baby girl whose young mother couldn't care for her. The moment they placed her in my arms, I felt a healing I never thought possible. This tiny life needed the whole of me, not the broken parts, and somehow I found strength I didn't know I had. In the years that followed, I threw myself into motherhood. Lily was a lively child, curious, stubborn, with a laugh that could light up the darkest room. Raising her left me little time to dwell on the past. The box of James's letters moved from my nightstand to my dresser drawer, then to a trunk in the attic. As Lily grew, our house filled with the signs of life: her drawings, Thomas's medical journals, photo albums from birthdays and Christmases. Thomas's practice thrived, and when Lily was 7, we moved to a larger house in a better school district. I went back to work part-time as a nurse, working 3 days a week at a women's health clinic while Lily was in school. We spent summers vacationing on Cape Cod, building sandcastles on the beach, and collecting seashells that still sit in a jar on my windowsill. We were happy, truly, deeply happy. But James never really left. He lived in the corners of my mind, in the unanswered questions. Sometimes I'd see a man on the street with his build or his walk, and my heart would skip a beat before I realized it couldn't be him. Sometimes I'd dream of him, so vivid it felt like he was right there beside me, and wake up crying, with Thomas holding me, never asking why. He always knew. When Lily was 12, she found out about James. She'd been searching the attic for Christmas decorations when she stumbled upon the box, bringing it down with innocent curiosity. "Mommy, who's James?" she asked. In that moment, I felt the room spinning. Thomas took her out for ice cream to give me time to compose myself. That night, we sat down and told her the story, a simplified version, appropriate for her age. "So you loved two men?" she asked, her face serious. "I still do," I admitted, glancing at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "You can hold space for two people in your heart, you just love them in different ways." Lily thought about that for a minute, then asked the question that had haunted me for 17 years. "Do you think he's dead?" I told her the truth. "I don't know, sweetie. I had to learn to live with not knowing." By the 1980s, James's case had gone cold. Sheriff Miller had retired years earlier, and Okeechee's new sheriff had never even heard of James Calloway. When I called to ask about the case, the FBI file had been archived in their massive system. James's parents had both passed away, his father in 1978, his mother in 1982. I attended both funerals, standing quietly in the back of the church, still the almost daughter-in-law after all those years. Life continued its relentless march forward. In 1990, Lily went to college, studying pre-med, following in her father's footsteps. Thomas's hair turned gray at the temples, and silver threads appeared in mine. For our 20th wedding anniversary, we traveled to Hawaii, walking on black sand beaches and watching volcanoes smoke. I turned 43, 44, 50 years piling up like seashells on the shore. Nearly 30 years after James disappeared, in 1995, I received a call from a detective in the Virginia State Police Cold Case Unit. They were reinvestigating several unsolved cases from the 1960s using new DNA technology. "Do you have any of James's personal items?" "A comb, a toothbrush, something that might contain his DNA." I didn't. All of James's belongings had been in his parents' care, and after they died, the house was sold, and their things were either given away or thrown out. All I had were the letters, just paper and ink, no skin cells or hair follicles to compare to the blood found beside his truck all those years ago. "However, we did find something interesting," the detective said. "While reviewing the original case files, we discovered that the day after James went missing, a man matching his description was admitted to a hospital in West Virginia with severe head trauma, no identification. He died 3 days later without regaining consciousness." My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. Why wasn't this connected to James's case at the time? Jurisdictional issues, poor communication. The patient was listed as John Doe. No one came to claim him, so he was cremated. But we found a photograph in their files. He paused. "Mrs. Whitaker, I need to warn you, his injuries were severe, and identification is difficult." They sent the photograph by certified mail. Thomas and I opened it together. The man in the hospital bed was unrecognizable, his face swollen and bandaged, tubes in his nose and mouth. It could have been James, or it could have been any young man with dark hair. "Do you think it's him?" Thomas asked gently. "I don't know," I whispered. That was the cruelest part. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. Another possibility that offered no comfort. Later that year, they exhumed the remains from an unmarked grave in Charleston. DNA testing was still primitive back then, and the results were inconclusive, not enough viable samples to compare to James's distant cousins. Another dead end, another wound reopened, bleeding fresh all over again. In 1997, Lily got married to a wonderful young doctor she'd met during her residency. I helped her pick out her wedding dress, standing beside her in the bridal shop mirror. "Mom," she said suddenly, "are you thinking about your wedding that never happened?" "No," I said, and it was mostly true. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am to be here with you." In 2000, I became a grandmother to twins, a boy and a girl. They named them James and Eleanor, unaware of the significance of the first name. When Lily told me their chosen names, I had to excuse myself to the hospital bathroom, where I cried silently, marveling at the strange twists of fate. In 2002, Thomas retired. We sold our house in Hartford and moved to a small town on the Massachusetts coast. He took up woodworking, I joined a book club and volunteered at the local library. We settled into the rhythm of retirement, morning walks on the beach, weekends watching our grandchildren grow, planning small adventures while we still could. In 2011, Thomas was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was advanced when they found it, as it so often is. 6 months, the oncologist told us in his cold exam room. Maybe a year with aggressive treatment. He lived for 8 months and 14 days. I cared for him at home, just as he'd wanted, our roles reversed, me the doctor, him the patient. Lily came as often as she could, bringing the twins to make their grandfather smile, even on his worst days. In those final months, we talked about everything, our life together, our few regrets, our many joys. And of course, we talked about James. I never resented a ghost, he said one night as I adjusted his morphine drip. I always felt like he sent you to me, as if he knew I'd love you the way you deserved. I kissed his forehead, the thin skin stretched over fragile bones. I loved 2 good men in my life, I said. Most people never find even one. After Thomas died, I thought about moving back to Vermont, back to Okeechee, to the place where it all began. But my life wasn't there anymore. My daughter, my grandchildren, my memories with Thomas were rooted in New England. So I stayed in our little house by the sea, learning to sleep in our bed alone, adjusting to the overwhelming silence in the rooms. Life moved slower without Thomas. I volunteered more at the library, joined a widow's support group, and Lily's family came down from Boston for Sunday dinners whenever they could. I scattered Thomas's ashes in the ocean, as he'd wished, and planted a maple tree in the backyard in his memory. Life went on, not as bright as it once was, but still worth living. Then, in April 2013, 47 years after James disappeared, a package showed up on my doorstep. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, and sealed with layers of tape. The postmark was from Guadalajara, Mexico, with no return address, only my name and address, written in a shaky handwriting I didn't recognize. I almost threw it away, thinking it was a scam or a mistake, but curiosity got the better of me. I used kitchen scissors to cut through the tape and paper, revealing a wooden box, hand-carved with intricate patterns. Inside the box, nestled in cotton, was a letter and a small leather notebook. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. The paper was thin and yellowed, the handwriting unsteady, but I recognized it instantly. I'd spent years reading those precious letters, that same script. My dearest Mary, it began, Mary. Only James called me Mary. I had to sit down, the room spinning around me. I clutched the letter to my chest, terrified to read on, yet unable to stop. After taking several deep breaths, I continued. If you're reading this, it means I've left this world, and my friend and caregiver Manuel has kept his promise to send these things to you. Over the years, I've written this letter 1,000 times in my heart, but never found the right words to explain the unexplainable. How does a man apologize for disappearing from the life of the woman he loves? What explanation could ease nearly 50 years of uncertainty and pain? That June day, I was driving to you, my truck filled with all my belongings and my heart full of dreams for our future. Just across the Virginia-West Virginia border, I stopped to help a man whose truck had broken down. There were 2 other men with him, but I didn't see them at first. They attacked me, robbed me, beat me unconscious, and left me in a ditch by the road, thinking I was dead. The next morning, a migrant farm worker found me. He didn't take me to the hospital. He was in the country illegally and feared the authorities. He brought me to his brother's house. I had no identification. The thieves had taken everything. I was unconscious for days, and when I woke up, I remembered nothing, not my name, not where I was going, not you. The head trauma had erased my memory. That family nursed my body back to health, but my mind remained a blank slate. They called me Miguel, and when the harvest season ended, they took me back to Mexico. I learned Spanish, took odd jobs, and eventually became a carpenter's apprentice. I built a new life, never knowing I'd already had one. The memories came back slowly, in fragments, in dreams, flashes of your smile, the sound of your laughter, the pharmacy counter, the taste of cherry soda. By the time I began to piece together who I was, nearly 10 years had passed. Through an American church mission in the village, I learned that I'd been declared dead at a hospital in West Virginia, a case of mistaken identity, confused with another, John Doe. I also learned that my parents had passed away, that you'd married a doctor named Thomas Whitaker, had a daughter, and built a life that no longer needed a ghost. What right did I have to resurrect myself, to upend the life you'd built from the ruins of our tragedy? I convinced myself that staying dead was my final act of love. I married a local woman, Maria, who knew my strange story, but loved me anyway. We had 3 sons, who never knew their father had once been James Calloway from Virginia. Maria died of pneumonia in 1998, and since then, I've lived alone with only my woodworking and the memories of 2 lives, 2 loves. Now, I'm dying cancer, of all things. I can't leave this world knowing you might still believe I abandoned you, or that I was taken from you violently. The truth is simpler and more complicated. I got lost, and by the time I found my way back, it was too late. Returning to you would have brought more pain than healing. I've lived a good life, Mary, and I hope you have too. Enclosed is the notebook where I wrote down the memories as they returned. Maybe it will answer the questions this letter leaves unsaid. Regardless, please know that I loved you across time and distance, a love that was both my greatest joy and my deepest regret. Yours, now and forever, James. That day, I read the letter 7 times before opening the notebook, page after page of his journey back to himself. Fragments of our life together emerging from the fog of amnesia, my face becoming clearer and clearer in his sketches. The last entry was dated 2 months before the package arrived. It took me 3 days to finish the notebook. When I was done, I sat on the porch, watching the ocean, listening to the waves crash against the shore. I felt a strange sense of peace. James hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't been murdered. He'd just gotten lost, found his way again, and then lost me once more, living a parallel life, loving me from afar, just as I'd loved him all those years. That night, I called Lily and asked her to come for the weekend. I needed to share this with someone who would understand, someone who had grown up in the shadow of James's ghost. So he was alive all this time, she said after I showed her everything. Do you wish he'd found you earlier? Before you met Dad? I thought about it carefully. No, I said finally. James was right. Once I had a new life, his reappearance would have been selfish. I wouldn't trade my life with you and your father for anything. Are you going to find his family in Mexico? His sons? I thought again. No, they have their own memories of their father. Telling them he had another identity, another love before their mother, would only bring more pain than healing. James had chosen to protect everyone, and I would honor that choice. I did, however, contact someone through the church mission he'd mentioned, Manuel, his caregiver. I sent him a small package, a thank you card, and a photograph of James and me at the county fair in 1965, back when our lives were still full of endless possibilities. I wanted someone in his Mexican life to know that, before tragedy altered his path, he had been deeply loved. I never received a reply, but somehow I knew the package arrived. The strangest thing about knowing the truth is that nothing really changed. The young man I'd loved was still gone. The life we'd planned never came to be. But the question that had haunted me for nearly 50 years, the one that had broken my heart, finally had an answer. And that sense of release was profound. Now, I keep James's notebook and letter in the same box as his old love letters. Sometimes, I read them all in order, our beginning, our abrupt end, and the long, separate journeys that followed. It feels like closing a circle. I'm 78 now, and I've loved 2 good men in my life. One was taken by cruel fate, only to return decades later. The other chose me, healed me, gave me a home, and then cancer took him too. Both taught me that love doesn't disappear, it transforms, evolves, finds new ways to sustain us. If this long, strange journey has taught me anything, it's that closure isn't always what we expect. Sometimes, closure is just knowing enough to live with the unknown. Sometimes, it's realizing that every love story ends eventually, but that doesn't diminish its beauty or its power to shape who we are. Oh my goodness, I've talked your ears off. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, you must be just as stubborn as I am. I'd love to hear your thoughts, or if my story touched you in any way. Please leave a comment below, and if you want to hear more from this old lady, hit subscribe and give this video a like. It means the world to me to know these memories won't die with me, but will live on in your hearts. Dear ones, life always has unexpected chapters, even when you think the story is over. Sometimes, the epilogue is just waiting to be found.